Today I'm going to tell you a story so tense it can make your pulse quicken, set against the endless dust and wind of the American frontier. Out there where the sky stretches wide and mercy runs thin, and the West was a place where law, greed, and survival collided every single day. It was a land where quiet ranches hid dangerous secrets and where one wrong move could turn a peaceful evening into a fight for your life. And this story began with something small, a glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel far away on a lonely ridge. A tiny flash that was enough to awaken a legend the West thought had vanished forever. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. In the year 1878, under the relentless Texas sun that baked the high plains of the Llano Estacado into a sea of red dust and brittle grass, Nora Kane led her bay mare back from the eastern pasture. The air hung heavy with the scent of dry buffalo grass and the faint metallic tang of the Pecos River, murmuring just beyond the fence line. Dust clung to her skirt like a second skin, gritty and unyielding, turning the faded calico a shade closer to the earth itself. Her boots crunched softly on the parched ground, each step deliberate, measured the rhythm she'd honed over 6 long years of pretending this was all there was. The ranch sprawled modest and unassuming along the river's bend, a cluster of weathered boards and barbed wire that she'd come to call home. No grand spread, just enough land to graze a few head of cattle draw water from the Pecos, without begging, and keep the world at arm's length. Nora's hand rested loose on the lead rope, her fingers brushing the mare's sweat-damp neck. The animal nickered low, nosing at her shoulder, and Nora murmured back words lost in the wind, something about the day being done, about rest coming soon. But her pulse told a different story. Steady but watchful, the old instinct coiled deep in her veins, like a spring waiting to snap. She felt it before she saw it. A glint up on the northern ridge where the plains met the sky in a hazy line of scrub and rock. Sun on steel rifle barrel maybe, or a spyglass. It winked once sharp and gone, swallowed by the wavering heat. Nora didn't lift her head. She kept her pace even 1 foot in front of the other eyes on the corral gate ahead. The wind picked up hot and dry, carrying the faint rustle of grass bending like whispers. Her mouth went coppery, the taste of old fear, but she swallowed it down hard and familiar. 3 riders, she guessed, red bandanas at their throats marking them as Blackwater men. They crested the ridge for a heartbeat, silhouettes against the fading light, then melted back into the haze like ghosts retreating from the sun. Not drifters, not scouts, watchers probing. Nora's right forearm twitched the ghost of a draw she'd buried long ago. Dropped to one knee, 2 shots ended clean. But she didn't. Instead, she bent her head, wiped her wrist across her brow, let a strand of chestnut hair slip from under her bonnet. A ranch wife's move. Tired, harmless. The mare nickered again, softer this time, and Nora reached the gate, unlatched it with fingers that didn't shake, though God they wanted to. She turned the horse loose, watched it trot to the trough, the water sloshing faintly in the quiet. The riders were gone now, but their gaze lingered heavy as smoke. She closed the gate with both hands, slow, buying time to breathe. Cole would be inside, lamp flickering, coffee brewing. He'd ask about the day, She'd say fine. He'd believe her because he needed to, because 6 years of dust and silence had taught him to trust the dust and silence. The hoofbeats came then, not fading away, but turning onto the long dirt track that led straight to the house. Nora froze, one hand still on the latch. Not 3 this time, 6, maybe more. The rhythm was heavier, deliberate, a group riding in tight formation. She straightened, smoothed her apron, felt the cool weight of the Colt Frontier hidden beneath the folds, its checkered grip worn smooth from years she didn't touch anymore. 6 years untouched, buried under the floorboards, like a secret she couldn't afford to remember. She didn't reach for it. Not yet. The riders crested the last rise dust, boiling ahead of them like a storm warning. At the front, tall in the saddle, a dappled gray stallion, stepping proud, Cade Harlan, black hat, black vest, red bandana. The rest fanned out behind him, hard men, notched revolvers, eyes sweeping the ranch like they already owned it. Nora stood alone by the corral wind, tugging at her bonnet, the Pecos whispering behind her. She could still smell the grass, the horse sweat the dust. Could still hear the soft slosh of water as the mare drank. Could still turn and walk inside, call Cole. Pretend this was just another evening bleeding into night. But the hoofbeats kept coming closer, straight toward the porch. Nora let her hands fall to her sides. She lifted her chin just enough, not defiance, not yet. Only acknowledgement. The lead rider reined in 20 yards out. Cade Harlan removed his hat with slow courtesy, the gesture almost gentlemanly. His eyes met hers, brown and unreadable, steady as a predator's. "Evenin', Mrs. Kane." She answered softly the way a ranch wife might. "Evenin'." The wind shifted between them, carrying the faint scent of gun oil and leather. 6 men waited behind him, hands near holsters, eyes on her. And somewhere in the house, Cole would have heard the horses by now, stepping to the window. Nora felt the moment stretch thin and brittle like wire, about to snap. She took one slow breath, then another. The riders didn't dismount. Harlan smiled small, polite, cold. "We've come to talk about water rights." The words hung there, simple and final. Nora didn't move. Behind her, the corral gate creaked once in the wind. Ahead, the porch light flickered on Cole lighting the lamp. The night was coming fast, and the riders were still waiting. She felt the old ache stir behind her ribs, the one that started the night Nate's body came back on a buckboard blanket. Over his face, Marshal's star still pinned. She pushed it down deep. But the wind kept blowing hot and unrelenting, and in the quiet that followed, Nora wondered how much longer she could pretend the dust wasn't settling on everything she held dear. The riders shifted in their saddles, horses stamping impatiently. Harlan's smile thinned. 3 days, Mrs. Kane." The morning sun climbed slow and pale over the rim of the high plains, burning off the night's chill, and turning the dew on the buffalo grass to quicksilver before it vanished. Dust devils spun lazy along the fence line, where Nora Kane and Cole Harlan worked the north pasture. The wind came steady out of the southwest, hot already, carrying the dry scent of sage and distant river mud, tugging at the loose strands of Nora's hair beneath her bonnet. She drove a staple into a cedar post with measured swings of the hammer, clean controlled, no wasted motion. Each strike rang sharp against the quiet, the way she'd learned to do everything these last 6 years. Cole knelt a few feet away, tightening wire with pliers, his hands moving sure but slower than usual. A thin bruise shadowed his temple from the night before, when he'd pressed too hard against the window frame watching the riders leave. He hadn't said much since dawn. Neither had she. Some silences were safer than words. The hammer rang once, twice. Then Nora paused, head cocked. A single set of hooves coming down the ridge trail, not the heavy rhythm of a group, but one horse walking careful. She didn't straighten right away, just kept her eyes on the post, listening. Cole glanced up, then back to the wire, pretending to be busy, but she saw the line of his shoulders tighten. A young rider crested the rise. Red bandana at his throat, same as the others last night. But he rode alone, slender shoulders still carrying some boy in them. Jed Pike, she guessed from the way he sat the saddle, too stiff, too aware of being watched. He reined in 20 yards, out lifting a hand in what might have passed for a friendly wave, if his eyes hadn't kept darting past her to the barn, the corral, the glint of the well. "Mornin'," he called, voice cracking just a hair on the second syllable. "Got turned around a bit, headin' for the main road to Red Bluff. Mind pointin' me?" Nora set the hammer down on the post. Slow, deliberate. She wiped her palms on her apron, felt the familiar weight of the Colt shift against her thigh, still untouched, still hidden. Cole stayed where he was, pliers still in hand, but his eyes followed every move. "You're not lost," she said, voice mild. "Main road's east. Follow the ridge another mile. But you're welcome to water your horse before you go. Looks like he's been pushed." Jed hesitated. His gaze flicked again to the barn doors, the windmill, the shadowed mouth of the canyon beyond, then back to her. "Mighty kind, ma'am." She nodded toward the trough by the corral. "Help yourself." He dismounted slow, like he expected the ground to give way. The horse, a bay-gelding, army-issue brand faint under the dust, lowered its head to drink. Jed kept one hand on the reins, the other hovering near his hip. Nora saw the butt of the revolver there. New blued steel still carrying factory gleam, the kind of shine you didn't get from months in a holster. She walked closer, casual, stopping at the fence rail. Cole stayed put, but she felt his tension like heat off a stove. "New iron?" she asked, nodding toward the gun. Tone light, neighborly. "Looks fresh out of the crate." Jed's hand jerked toward the grip, then stopped. He flushed red under the brim of his hat. "Huh, oh yeah. Just hunting piece. Got it last week. Deer been thick up in the breaks." Nora tilted her head. "Winchester 73. Good choice for distance. Though most folks around here still run Sharps or Henrys for game." Jed swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Yeah. Well, boss likes new gear." The word hung there a second too long. Boss. Nora smiled. Small, harmless. "Must be nice. Water's cold. Take your time." She turned away, walked back to the post, picked up the hammer again, but her grip on the handle was white-knuckled now, nails digging half-moons into her palms through the leather gloves. The pain was sharp grounding. A reminder, keep the mask on. One crack and the boy would ride straight back to Cade Harlan with a story about the quiet ranch wife who knew too much about military rifles. Jed drank fast, mounted quicker. He touched his hat brim, awkward salute, and turned the bay back up the ridge trail. Dust rose behind him, thin and pale in the climbing sun. Nora waited until horse and rider dropped out of sight. Then she let the hammer fall from her hand. It thudded into the dirt. Cole stood up slow, brushing dust from his knees. He came over, stopping close enough that she could smell the honest sweat on him, the faint trace of coffee from breakfast. He wasn't asking for directions. Cole said quietly. "No," she answered. He was counting. Barn, corral, well, us. Cole followed her gaze to where the rider had disappeared. His jaw worked once, twice. "They're getting bolder." Nora stared at the empty ridge. The wind moved through the grass again, whispering secrets she already knew. "They're inventorying. Not for a robbery, for something bigger." Cole exhaled through his nose. "What kind of bigger?" She didn't answer right away. Just reached down, picked up the hammer, set it carefully on the post again. Her fingers left faint red crescents on the handle where she'd gripped too hard. "The kind that needs repeaters, still smelling like factory grease," she said finally. "And scouts who ride alone because they're afraid of being seen in a group." Cole looked at her, then really looked past the apron, past the bonnet, past 6 years of quiet mornings and shared suppers. He saw the woman who'd once ridden with a marshal star and a reputation that still made men whisper in saloons from Austin to Abilene. Then he saw the fear in her eyes, not of dying, but of losing the life they'd scraped together from the ashes of everything that came before. "We can't wait 3 days," he said. "We have to." Her voice was low, almost lost in the wind. "If we run now, they'll know we're scared. If we fight now, they'll burn the place and call it an accident. We wait. We watch. We make sure when we move, it's the last move they ever see coming." He studied her a long moment. The sun beat down, turning the horizon into a shimmering line. Somewhere beyond that line, Jed Pike was already riding back to report. Cole reached out, touched her wrist where the glove had ridden up, exposing pale skin marked with those fresh half-moons. "We wait," he said. Nora nodded once. The wind gusted harder, carrying the faint, far-off sound of a single horse moving away down the ridge. Dust swirled low across the pasture, settling on everything like a promise. And in the quiet that followed, Nora felt the first real crack appear in the mask she'd worn for 6 long years, a thin hairline fracture no one else could see, but she felt it deep in her chest, spreading slow. Cole turned back to the wire pliers in hand again. Nora picked up the hammer. But her eyes stayed on the ridge a second longer than they should have. The sun climbed higher, merciless, and somewhere out there, a boy with a new Winchester was already telling Kate Harlan that the quiet woman by the fence knew things she had no business knowing. The afternoon sun slanted low through the dusty windows of May Whitaker's general store, painting long bars of white light across the pine floorboards. Red Bluff Crossing smelled of old coffee ground saddle soap and the faint metallic bite of fear that had settled into the town like damp rot. Nora Kane drove the wagon in, alone, reins loose in her hands, the team horses plodding slow after the morning's work. She tied them to the hitch rail outside the store, smoothed her apron, and stepped up onto the boardwalk. Inside, the air was thick. 2 black watermen flanked May behind the counter, hard-faced, thumbs hooked in their gun belts. Silas Rattler Kane leaned across the scarred wood, his snakeskin hatband catching the light. The little rattles on his holster clicked softly every time he shifted. May stood rigid, her hands flat on the counter as though bracing against a wind only she could feel. A display of canned peaches lay scattered across the floor. Glass shards glittered like broken promises. Rattler's voice rolled out low and easy the way a man talks when he knows no one will argue. "Protection's going up, May. Town's changing. 500 a month starting today. Be a shame if this nice little place had an accident." One of the men swept another shelf clean with his forearm. Tins clattered and rolled. May flinched, but didn't speak. Nora paused just inside the door, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. Her heart kicked once hard, then steadied. She could feel the weight of the Colt against her thigh, hidden under the folds of her skirt. She could feel the old rhythm starting in her fingertips, draw point fire, but she stayed still. Let the door swing shut behind her with a soft bell jingle. All 3 men turned. Nora dipped her head small and quick, the way a ranch wife might when walking into trouble not her own. "Oh my," she said, voice pitched soft and unsteady. "What a mess. May you got a broom? I'd be happy to help clean up." May's eyes met hers, wide, grateful, terrified. She nodded once. Rattler straightened, sizing Nora up, the way a wolf sizes up a lamb that wandered too close. His lips curled. "This ain't your concern, lady." Nora took another step forward, basket on her arm movement, slow and unthreatening. She bent to pick up a dented can of tomatoes, turning it in her hands as though inspecting for damage. My husband's family helped build this town, she said quietly. May's granddaddy gave him his first job. Maybe it is my concern. The words hung there soft as smoke, but they carried. Rattler's face tightened. He stepped closer, close enough that Nora could smell the tobacco on his breath and the sour edge of yesterday's whiskey. You should watch yourself, Mrs. Kane. His voice dropped. Accidents happen. Nora straightened, still holding the can. She met his eyes only for a second, then dropped her gaze again, letting her shoulders round just enough. Yes, they do, she said, almost a whisper. Like the one 2 weeks ago. Your man Davis, that nasty fall near Crow Creek Canyon, the one nobody reported. The store went still. Rattler's hand twitched toward his gun belt. The rattles clicked once sharp. His face drained of color beneath the tan. How the hell? Nora set the can down on the counter with careful hands. Her voice stayed small, almost apologetic. Funny thing about accidents. You never know who might have seen something. The two men behind Rattler exchanged glances, quick, uneasy. They hadn't expected words like that from a ranch wife. Rattler stared at her, a long beat, longer jaw working. Then he forced a laugh, short, ugly. We'll finish this later, he told May. He jerked his head toward the door. The three of them filed out, boots heavy on the boards. The bell jingled again as the door slammed shut. Silence rushed back in. May sagged against the counter, breath coming in short gasps. She looked at Nora like she was seeing her for the first time. Thank you, she whispered. But you shouldn't have. They're dangerous. Nora began picking up the scattered cans, one by one, setting them back on the shelf with deliberate care. Her hands were steady now, too steady. Inside, something old and cold had uncoiled fully. She could feel it spreading behind her ribs. They're getting more organized, she said. That's what worries me. May retrieved a broom from the back room, started sweeping glass into a pile. Her voice shook. Sheriff Bullock says they're just passing through, part of some big land deal. Nora paused, a tin of coffee in her hands. That's what he says. She worked in silence for a minute, letting the soft scrape of the broom fill the space between them. They're buying up every water right along the rail line. May said slowly, understanding dawning. Forcing folks to sell. But why, it's just ranch country. Nora set the tin down. Her fingers brushed the hidden fold of her skirt, unconscious, automatic. It's also the straightest shot from the high plains to the railhead at El Paso. Long stretches with no telegraph, no law worth the name. Perfect for moving things that need to stay hidden. May stopped sweeping. The broom handle clattered against the floor. You think... I think... Nora interrupted gently. You should go visit your sister in Amarillo. Just for a week or two. May stared at her. I can't just close the store. Nora's voice stayed soft, but it carried the quiet weight of someone who'd given orders before and been obeyed. Please, May. Things are about to change in Red Bluff Crossing. When they do, it's better if certain people aren't around to see it. May searched her face. Whatever she saw there made her swallow hard and nod once. Nora turned back to the shelves, restacking the last of the cans. Outside, the sun had dropped lower, throwing the street into long shadows. Horses stamped at the hitch rail. A dog barked once, sharp and lonely. She finished loading her supplies into the wagon flour coffee, a sack of nails, then paused at the false bottom she'd built under the seat. Her fingers brushed the oiled leather, felt the familiar curve of the Colt Frontier waiting there. She didn't draw it. Not yet. But as she climbed up and gathered the reins, her right hand lingered a second too long on the hidden compartment. May stepped out onto the boardwalk, broom still in hand. "Nora," she called softly. Nora looked down at her. The wind tugged at her bonnet, carrying the faint scent of gun oil from somewhere far off. "How did you know about Crow Creek?" Nora didn't answer. Her hand drifted slow, almost without thought, to the fold of her skirt again. The wagon rolled out of town, wheels creaking over ruts, dust rising in the late light. Behind her, May Whitaker stood alone on the boardwalk, watching until the wagon disappeared around the bend. And somewhere down the street, Silas Rattler Kane leaned against a post hat, low eyes fixed on the receding dust. The look he gave the wagon wasn't the look of a bully anymore. It was the look of a man who just realized the lamb might have teeth. The town had been pulled in now, quietly, irreversibly, and the shadows under the false fronts seemed to lengthen a little faster than the sun could account for. The lamp on the kitchen table threw a warm, unsteady circle of light across the oilcloth. Shadows stretched long from the corners of the room, pooling under the chairs like spilled ink. Outside, the night had settled thick over the Pecos Valley. Crickets, silent wind gone still. Only the faint creak of the house timbers cooling after the day's heat. Nora Kane sat with her back to the window. The old Northern Trail map lay spread between her and Cole Harlan. The paper worn at the folds, marked in faint pencil lines she'd drawn years ago. Water crossings, blind canyons, old Comanchero trails now used by men who carried no name worth speaking. Cole's hands rested flat on the table, fingers splayed. He hadn't touched the coffee she'd poured him. The cup had gone cold. "Roy Bullock rode out this afternoon," he said quietly. "While you were in town. Asked about the water rights again, asked about our plans for the future of the ranch." His voice stayed even, but the last words carried an edge. He didn't say it outright, but the threat was there. Said the country's changing fast. Said folks who don't adapt get left behind. Nora traced one of the pencil lines with her fingertip. Slow, deliberate. She could still smell the dust of Red Bluff crossing on her skirt, the faint tang of gun oil that had clung to Rattler Kane's coat. She could still see May Whitaker's eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes when a person realizes the rules they've lived by no longer apply. Cole watched her. He wasn't asking as sheriff. He was asking as someone who's already sold out. She nodded once. The lamp flame dipped, throwing his face into half shadow. "We can't keep pretending this is just about water," he said. "They're pressing every ranch along the line, buying or burning. And now Bullock's riding right up to our door." Nora lifted her eyes to his, for the first time in 6 years. She let him see the full weight behind them, not the soft gaze of a wife, but the steady, unblinking stare of the woman who'd once tracked men across 5 territories and brought them back in chains or coffins. "I know," she said. Cole exhaled through his nose. "Then tell me what you know." "All of it." The silence stretched. She could hear the old clock ticking in the parlor. Slow, relentless. She could feel the Colt Frontier waiting under the floorboard at her feet, wrapped in oiled cloth untouched for too long. She reached down. Fingers found the hidden seam in the plank. The board lifted with a soft pop. She drew out the revolver, old worn grips, darkened by years of sweat and powder barrel, still straight and true. She laid it on the table between them, beside the map. Cole stared at the gun like it was a snake that might strike. His face went pale under the lamp glow. Nora picked up a soft rag from the sideboard, began wiping dust from the cylinder. Slow strokes. Methodical. "Texas," she said. 6 years ago, I was tracking a ring selling army rifles to the Comancheros down in the Big Bend. New Winchesters fresh from the arsenals. The trail led north. I got close. Too close. My superior shut it down. Said the evidence wasn't solid. Said I was chasing ghosts. She turned the revolver, checked the chambers one by one. Empty. Always empty when it lived under the floor. My brother Nate didn't believe it was ghosts. He kept digging. Found the names, found the payments, found the orders to silence anyone who got too near. Her voice stayed quiet, almost conversational. They killed him. Made it look like an ambush gone wrong. Left him in a dry wash, with his star still pinned to his shirt. Cole's hands clenched on the table. He didn't speak. I walked away. Nora continued. Hung up the badge. Came here. Thought if I stayed quiet long enough the trail would die. But it didn't. It just moved north. Same rifles, same tactics, same men behind it. She set the rag down. They think I'm just a rancher's wife. That's their biggest mistake. Cole looked from the gun to her face. His throat worked. You've been carrying this alone for 6 years. I had to. Her voice cracked just once, small and sharp. If they knew they'd come for you first, to hurt me, to make me sell, to make me disappear. He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. His palm was warm rough from fence posts and branding irons. She didn't pull away. What do we do? He asked. Nora stared at the map, at the thin pencil line she'd drawn 6 years ago, connecting Texas to the Pecos Valley, connecting Nate's grave to this quiet ranch. We can wait, she said slowly. Let Blackwater make the next move. Hope they overreach before they burn us out. She paused. Or we send word to Jack Calder. Tell him the old patterns are back. Risk everything if the message gets intercepted. Cole's thumb brushed the back of her hand. You trust Calder? With my life, she said, but not with yours. The clock ticked on. The lamp flame held steady. Nora lifted the Colt again, turned it once in her hand, then set it back on the table. The metal clicked softly against the wood. She looked at Cole. Really looked. Saw the lines around his eyes deeper now than when they'd married. Saw the quiet strength that had kept them both alive these years. I can't run anymore, she whispered. Not from this. He nodded slow. Once. Before either of them could speak again, a soft knock sounded at the back door. 3 taps. Pause. 2 more. Nora's hand moved to the Colt. Instinct, not thought. Cole stood chair-scraping back. She rose too. Crossed the room on silent feet. Opened the door a crack. A Lakota boy, no more than 12, stood in the dark blanket wrapped tight against the night chill. His eyes were wide but steady. He held out a folded paper sealed with wax. Nora took it. The boy vanished into the shadows without a word. She closed the door, turned back to the table. Cole watched her break the seal. The note was short. Familiar handwriting. Old patterns from Texas resurfacing. Watch your back. J.C. Nora stared at the words until the lamp flame blurred them. Cole stepped close behind her. His hand rested light on her shoulder. Neither spoke. The clock ticked on. Outside, the night waited patient, dark, and growing colder. Then the sound came. Hooves. Not distant now. Close. 6 sets, maybe more, walking slow and deliberate up the long dirt track. They stopped right in front of the porch. Cole's hand tightened on her shoulder. Nora felt her pulse kick hard against her throat. She didn't move. Neither did he. The lamp flame held still as though even it knew better than to flicker. Outside, a saddle creaked. A man cleared his throat, and in the heavy silence that followed the boards of the porch, groaned under boots that weren't Cole's. The door burst inward. Rough hands seized them both before the lamp could gut her out. The wagon ride ended in darkness and dust. They hauled Nora Kane out under a sky thick with stars, the air sharp with pine resin, and the faint metallic stink of old stagecoach grease. The way station squatted against the side of the Pecos, brakes like a broken tooth, boards warped, windows, shattered roof sagging under years of neglect. Lanterns burned low inside, throwing yellow light through the gaps. They marched her through what had once been the main room, boots thudding on splintered planks. She kept her head down, shoulders rounded, letting them think she was broken. Inside, the fear hadn't vanished. It had simply changed shape. No longer the wild panic of losing everything in one night. Now it was cold, precise. A blade held steady against her own throat. They shoved her into the old station manager's office, a small room at the back, high windows barred with iron. A single chair bolted to the floor. They sat her down hard, zip ties around wrists and ankles tighter than before. One man, Silas Rattler Kane, checked the knots with a satisfied grunt and then left without a word. The door closed. A key turned. Nora sat still for a long minute, letting her eyes adjust. Moonlight slanted through the high windows, silvering the dust motes that drifted like slow snow. Beyond the glass, she could see the yard. Men unloading crates from a second wagon. Wooden boxes stamped in faded black letters, U.S. Ordnance Department. They pried one open with crowbars. Metal gleamed inside disassembled Gatling gun parts, barrels, and tripods wrapped in oiled cloth. Another crate revealed rolled maps, edges curling marked with red ink waterholes, rail routes, cavalry patrol paths. Evidence not of robbery, of something far worse. She felt the old iron settle in her chest, cold, familiar patient. The fear was still there, coiled tight. But it no longer owned her. It was fuel now. She began to work. Hands behind the chair, back fingers probing the zip tie. She remembered the Comanchero scout who taught her the trick years ago. Twist, flex, find the weak point, where the plastic had stretched. She twisted, flexed. A fingernail caught, bent backward. Pain flared white hot. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep silent. Another twist. Blood welled under the nail, warm and sticky. She kept going, slow, methodical. One loop gave, then another. She heard boots in the hall. Froze. The door opened. Colonel Vance Holt stepped in alone. He carried no weapon in his hand. Didn't need to. The confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. He pulled up a second chair, sat facing her, elbows on his knees. "You'll be here until your husband signs the papers," he said. His smile was calm, almost kind. "Easy enough. He loves you. He'll do what's right." Nora lifted her head slowly. Let the tears come, real ones, born of pain and rage and 6 years of holding everything in. They tracked down her cheeks, hot against the cold air. She looked straight into his eyes. "You should check more carefully who you kidnap," she said. Voice soft, steady. No tremor now. Holt's smile faltered just for a second. Then he saw it, the way her gaze didn't waver, the way the tears didn't soften the steel behind them. Recognition hit him like a cold wind. He leaned back, chair creaking. "Iron Nora," he whispered. The name sounded small in his mouth, like something he'd only half believed until now. Nora didn't answer, just held his stare. He stood abruptly. The chair scraped back. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the latch. "You won't walk out of here," he said. Not a threat, a fact. The door closed. The key turned again. Nora exhaled, once long, controlled. The tears dried on her cheeks. She resumed working the zip tie. Another fingernail split. Blood dripped onto the floorboards, dark spots in the moonlight. She kept going. Later, how much later she couldn't tell, the door opened again. Soft footsteps this time. Hesitant. Jed Pike slipped inside, carrying a tin cup of water. His hand shook. The cup sloshed. He stopped a few feet away, eyes wide in the dim light. "Ma'am, Mrs. Kane." His voice cracked. "I brought you some water." Nora looked up at him. The boy, because that's what he still was, stood frozen cup trembling. She spoke quietly. "Thank you, Jed." He swallowed, took one step closer. His gaze flicked to the door, then back to her. You really are her, aren't you?" he whispered. "Iron Nora." Nora considered him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, small final. Jed's face went pale. The cup shook harder. Water spilled over the rim, dripping onto the boards. He set it on the floor beside her chair, careful, like he was afraid to get too close. Then he backed away, eyes never leaving her face. The door closed behind him. Nora stared at the cup. Water pooled around its base, reflecting the thin moonlight. She flexed her wrists again. The last loop of the zip tie gave way with a faint snap. Blood ran down her fingers now, warm and steady. She didn't move yet. She only listened to the low voices outside, to the creak of wagons, to the distant snort of horses, and somewhere in the dark, the slow, patient beat of her own heart. Through the high window, she saw it begin, one of Holt's men tipping a tin of coal oil onto the crates. A match flared. Flames licked up the side of the first box, catching the oiled cloth around the Gatling barrels. Rolled maps curled and blackened at the edges, red-inked rail routes vanishing in orange. Another crate caught, then a third. Smoke boiled toward the ceiling, thick and black. Nora's stomach twisted. Those maps, those serial numbers on the gun parts, proof not just of smuggling, but of treason. Names, dates, payments. The kind of evidence that could drag men like Holt and Secretary Crow into open court instead of letting them slip away on technicalities again. She rose slowly. The chair scraped back. Her wrists hung loose at her sides, now bloodied raw but free. She reached under her torn apron, drew the Colt Frontier she'd slipped from the wagon floor during the ride. The motion was smooth, practiced. No flourish, just necessity. Outside, the fire roared louder. Voices shouted, horses screamed. Nora stepped to the door, listened. Then she pushed it open. Smoke curled into the hallway like a living thing. She walked through it, slow, deliberate, into the main room where the flames danced high. Colonel Vance Holt turned first. His face went slack. "Iron Nora," he said again, this time like a curse. Silas Rattler Kane spun, good hand flashing toward his revolver. Nora fired once, clean snap of the Colt. Rattler's gun spun from his fingers, clattering across the boards. He staggered back, clutching his hand, face twisted in shock and pain. The room erupted. Cade Harlan lunged for cover behind a crate. Holt drew his own sidearm, old service revolver, steady despite the tremor in his voice. "Shoot her!" Nora stepped forward into the center of the room. The Colt stayed level, steady on Rattler's chest. Her skirt was torn at the hem. Blood streaked her sleeve. But her stance was calm-balanced, rooted the way she'd stood on a dozen courthouse steps and back alley dust before the legend took root. Smoke thickened in her throat. The heat pressed against her skin like a hand. She raised her voice clear, carrying cutting through the crackle of flames and the shouts. "You're burning evidence of treason, not bank robbery. Guns, maps, names. The whole town will pay when Washington finds out what you've sold." The room stuttered. One of the men pouring oil hesitated, tin tipping in his hand. Rattler's eyes flicked toward the doorway, then back to her. Cade Harlan's revolver wavered half an inch. From outside came the distant pop of rifles, sharp, deliberate. Not close yet. but coming. Jack Calder's men. Nora took one more step. The fire had spread to the second stack of crates, now flames licking higher maps, curling into hash. And in the silence between gunshots, the weight of what came next settled across the room like smoke no one could outrun. Nora stood there, bloodied hands, torn apron, Colt steady, while the night waited for her next move. The sun stood high over Red Bluff Crossing, merciless and white, turning the dust of Main Street into a shimmering haze that stung the eyes. Nora Kane rode in alone. The bay gelding she'd taken from the way station yard moved slow under her flanks, dark with sweat ears flicking at every sound. She hadn't waited for Jack Calder's full company. Couldn't. The smoke from the burning crates still clung to her clothes, the taste of it bitter on her tongue. Behind her, the way station was a distant smudge of black against the horizon. Ahead lay the town she'd lived beside for 6 years. Quiet porches, false front stores, the small lives she'd watched from afar. She reined up at the edge of town. The street was empty, except for the armed men, 15 of them, maybe more, scattered along the boardwalks and in doorways. Blackwater riders wearing tin stars pinned crooked to their vests, deputized by Sheriff Roy Bullock in name only. Rifles rested across saddles, shotguns cradled in arms. May Whitaker stood in front of her own store wrists, bound a shotgun barrel pressed against her back. Doc Ezra Hale knelt beside her hands, zip-tied glasses, askew blood dried at the corner of his mouth. Bullock waited in the middle of the street, boots planted wide, revolver in his right hand. He saw Nora first. His face split into a slow, ugly grin. "Well now," he called voice, carrying the length of the empty thoroughfare. "Mrs. Kane." Come to join the party, Nora didn't answer right away. She eased the bay forward, slow steps, deliberate, letting the horse pick its way through the ruts. Every eye followed her. Every barrel tracked her. The air smelled of horse-dung, hot wood, and the faint copper of fear sweat. May's eyes met hers wide, pleading, terrified. Doc Ezra looked up too, recognition flickering behind the pain. Bullock raised his voice. "Let Holt and Blackwater go, or we burn this town to the ground. Every store, every house gone." He jerked his head. One of his men yanked May forward, using her as a shield. May stumbled breath, catching in a small, broken sound. The shotgun muzzle pressed harder against her spine. Nora stopped the horse 20 yards out. The street lay silent between them, except for the creak of saddles and the low, uneasy shifting of boots on boards. She sat straight in the saddle hands, loose on the reins. The Colt Frontier rested against her thigh, still there, still loaded. She felt the weight of every eye on her, the townspeople peering from windows, the children she'd never spoken to, but knew by name the old men who tipped their hats to her on quiet mornings. 6 years she'd lived among them as Nora Kane, quiet wife, steady hand at the well, polite nod on market days. Now they saw something else, something they'd whispered about in saloons and church pews, but never truly believed. Bullock's finger whitened on the trigger. "You think this ends with tricks," he snarled. "Sign the damn paper. Release Holt, or I drop her right here." May whimpered once small, broken. Doc Ezra strained against his gag eyes, pleading. Nora looked straight at May. Not at Bullock, not at the guns, at May. "Trust me," she said again, soft, certain. Then she raised her voice clear, carrying the length of the dusty street. "You all know the story of Sweetwater." The words fell like stones into still water. 19 men, 40 seconds. I didn't miss once. A ripple moved through the line of riders. Someone sucked in breath. A rifle barrel dipped an inch. Nora kept going, voice steady. No shout, no threat, just truth. Now you're holding empty guns. Every cartridge replaced a week ago. You felt the clicks. You know it's true. Bullock's laugh came out strangled. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She lifted the Colt, slow, deliberate, until it pointed at the ground between them. No flourish, no drama, just fact. "Drop your weapons," she said, "or I'll show you why they still call me Iron Nora." Silence stretched. The wind moved once through the street, lifting dust devils that swirled and died. A horse stamped. A man shifted weight. Bullock's hand shook harder. Sweat beaded on his brow, rolled into his eye. He blinked it away, but the revolver stayed pressed to May's head. Then slow, almost reluctant, his fingers opened. The gun fell. It hit the dirt with a dull thud, kicking up a small puff of dust. One by one, the others followed. Rifles clattered. Revolvers dropped. Hands rose slow, uncertain, some trembling. The tin stars came off last-pinned badges, hitting the boards like spent cartridges. Nora didn't move. From the north, the hoofbeats swelled into thunder. Jack Calder's riders poured into the street, 20 strong badges, gleaming rifles leveled. They fanned out, disarming the last holdouts with practiced efficiency. Cuffs clicked. Men were shoved to their knees. May broke free the moment Bullock's gun left her head. She ran stumbling wrists, still bound straight to Nora, wrapped her arms around her, sobbing into the torn shoulder of Nora's blouse. "You saved us, May," whispered voice thick. "All of us." Nora let herself be held just for a second. The pain in her shoulder flared, hot blood soaking through the fabric, but she stood steady. She looked over May's head toward the north, toward the canyon rim, toward the trail that led to Laguna Grande. Not yet, she thought. Her voice was low, almost lost in the sudden clamor of voices and hoofbeats. Boone Tucker and Baron Voss are running with every document from the last 6 years. Calder reined up nearby, face grim under his hat. He saw the blood, the Colt still in her hand, and the quiet that clung to her like smoke. "Nora." She shook her head once. Small, final. May stepped back, wiping her eyes. Doc Ezra was already being cut free, rubbing his wrists, staring at Nora like he'd never seen her before. The street filled with motion, marshals shouting orders, prisoners cursing, townspeople stepping cautiously onto porches. But Nora only stood there, Colt hanging loose at her side, blood dripping slow from her fingers into the dust. She looked north again. The sun beat down, turning the horizon into a shimmering line. Somewhere beyond that line, 2 men carried the last proof of everything she'd spent 6 years chasing. And the wind picked up low, steady, carrying the faint scent of pine and coming rain. Nora took one breath, then another. The street weighted heavy with the weight of what still had to be done. In the distance, fresh hoof prints cut north across the red earth, 2 horses riding hard, disappearing into the heat haze. No clean victory. Only the thin thread of Nate's memory still hanging by what little time remained. The afternoon sun bled low over Laguna Grande, turning the shallow, brackish water into a sheet of hammered copper. Wind off the high breaks kicked up dust devils along the rocky shore, whipping grit into eyes and throats. The small camp huddled near the water's edge. 12 riders, dismounted horses, tied short saddles still damp from the hard push north. 2 rowboats bobbed against the bank oars, shipped ready to ferry men and cargo to the steam launch, idling a quarter-mile out. Its stack puffed black smoke in lazy pulses, the engine's low chuff carrying across the water like distant thunder. Nora Kane moved alone through the scrub pines above the camp. Cole Harlan waited back at the draw, arm bound tight, face pale, insisting she go ahead while he covered the rear trail. She hadn't argued. The shoulder wound from Red Bluff Crossing had reopened during the ride. Fresh blood soaked the makeshift bandage warm and sticky against her skin. Every step sent a dull spike through muscle and bone, but she walked steady, Colt in her right hand, hammer back finger off the trigger. She stopped at the tree line. Below Major Boone Tucker stood apart taller than the rest, shoulders rigid under his coat. Beside him, Baron Klaus Voss, unmistakable in his tailored greatcoat. The faint glint of a monocle catching the sun held a leather dispatch case against his chest. Two small boats rocked at the bank. Tucker handed over a small worn journal leather cover, cracked edges frayed. The personal record he'd kept through 6 years of betrayal. Nora could see it from 50 yards, and the same journal Nate had mentioned in his last letter. The one that named names, dates, payments. The one that could bury Secretary Elias Crow or vanish forever on a Prussian ship. Voss barked an order in clipped German. His men began loading the boat's crates first, then rifles, then themselves. Tucker hesitated, glancing once toward the south trail, as though expecting pursuit. Nora stepped out into the open. The wind tore at her torn blouse, whipped strands of hair across her face. Dust swirled around her boots. She walked down the slope, slow, deliberate Colt hanging loose at her side. The camp froze. Voss turned first. His hand dropped to the pistol at his belt. Tucker's eyes widened, recognition hitting him like a slap. Nora stopped 30 yards out. The wind howled between them, carrying the sharp smell of pine sap, horse sweat, and coal smoke. She raised her voice clear, carrying over the gusts. "Major Boone Tucker," she said, "you killed Nate Kane for what's in that journal. Now you have a chance to make it right or die with it." Tucker's hand shook on the book. His face worked, fear, shame, the slow collapse of a man who told himself too many lies. He looked at Voss and then back at Nora. Voss snapped something in German, sharp, furious, and drew his pistol. Tucker's arm jerked. The journal sailed through the air, end over end, landing in the dust at Nora's feet. His voice cracked. "I don't want to die for Prussia." Voss roared a guttural curse and leveled his pistol at Tucker. Nora moved. She fired once clean snap of the Colt. Voss's revolver spun from his fingers, clattering across rock. He staggered back, clutching his hand, face twisted in shock. A second shot cracked from one of Voss's men, panicked wild. The bullet went high, then low, grazing Nora's already wounded shoulder. Pain exploded white-hot. Her legs buckled. She dropped to one knee, left arm useless, now blood sheeting down her sleeve in a warm rush. The journal lay inches from her boot. She reached for it, fingers closing around leather while the camp erupted. Men shouted, horses reared against ties. Voss screamed orders, blood dripping from his hand. Tucker stood frozen hands, empty, staring at the woman on her knees in the dust. Nora looked up at him through pain, through smoke, through 6 years of waiting. "Run," she rasped. Tucker hesitated one heartbeat, then bolted toward the trees. Voss lunged for his fallen pistol. Nora tightened her grip on the journal. Blood dripped onto the cover, dark spots on cracked leather. The wind howled louder, whipping dust into a stinging veil. From the south, the faint thunder of hooves, Calder's men closing at last. But the boats were already pushing off oars, dipping frantic into the copper water. Nora stayed on her knee, breathing shallow vision blurring at the edges, while the sun sank lower and the lake turned from copper to blood. She clutched the journal to her chest, and in the silence between gunshots and shouts, she felt the last piece of Nora slip away, quiet, final, irretrievable, leaving only iron, Nora kneeling in the dust, bleeding, waiting for whatever came next. The first edge of dawn crept cold and pale over Laguna Grande, turning the water from black to dull steel. Smoke from the steam launch still hung low, a gray smear against the sky. But the engine had gone silent, choked off by the heavier silhouette of the USS Rio Grande anchored offshore. Her guns trained on the smaller vessel. Captain Elias Holt's launch cut through the ripples, now carrying armed sailors in crisp blue, their oars dipping in unison. Nora knelt on the rocky shore where she'd fallen, journal clutched against her chest. Blood had soaked through her blouse in a dark spreading bloom. The fresh wound on her shoulder throbbed in time with her heartbeat, each pulse a reminder of the price already paid. The Colt lay beside her in the dust, empty now, 5 shots gone, the last one still ringing in her ears. Jack Calder rode in at the head of his mencote, flapping in the morning wind. He reined up hard, swung down, boots crunching gravel as he crossed to her. His face lined, weathered, went still when he saw the blood, the journal, the way she held herself together, with nothing but will. "And Nora," he said quietly. No title, no legend, just her name. She looked up, fists. Her eyes were dry, but the skin around them was tight, bruised looking. Calder knelt beside her. One of his deputies moved to cuff Baron Klaus Voss, who stood rigid, greatcoat, muddied monocle, cracked face, pale with the fury of a man who'd believed himself untouchable. Major Boone Tucker was already on his knees, wrists bound, staring at the ground like it might swallow him. Calder reached for the journal. Nora let him take it, slow, reluctant fingers opening. He flipped it open. Pages rustled, names, dates, transfers, and codes. Orders signed in Secretary Elias Crow's own hand. One entry, dated the night Nate died, carried a single line in Tucker's careful script: Kane silenced per directive. No witnesses. Calder's jaw tightened. He closed the book gently as though it might break. "This ends it," he said. "Crow. The payments. The whole rotten line. Nate will be cleared, public record, full honors." Nora nodded once. The motion cost her. Pain flared bright in her shoulder, but she didn't flinch. From the ridge above May, Whitaker watched. She'd ridden out with Doc Ezra Hale as soon as word reached Red Bluff Crossing. May stood a little apart, eyes red-rimmed, shawl clutched tight against the dawn chill. Doc Ezra beside her, glasses, fogged hands clasped like prayer. May's lips moved, barely audible. "She saved us," she whispered. "But she'll never be at peace again." Nora heard it. Didn't look up. Calder offered his hand. "Come back, Nora. The service needs you. We can finish this clean. Washington trial's the works." She looked at his hand, calloused, steady, then at Cole, who'd ridden in behind Calder's arm in a sling. Now face drawn, but eyes fixed on her. He hadn't spoken since they'd found her kneeling. Just watched, waiting. Nora shook her head. Slow, final. "I'm done," she said, voice cracked from smoke and pain. "I'm going home with him." Calder studied her a long moment. Then he nodded once, understanding more than he said. She rose, unsteady shoulders screaming, and walked to Cole. He met her halfway, wrapped his good arm around her without a word. She leaned into him, forehead against his chest, breathing in the familiar smell of him, sweat leather home. His heartbeat was steady under her ear, faster than usual, but steady. She turned her face up to his. "We can go back to the ranch," she whispered, voice raw. "But I'll never sleep easy again." Cole didn't answer with words. He only tightened his hold, eyes wet, silent. The Rio Grande's launch reached the shore. Sailors moved in efficient quiet, taking Voss and Tucker aboard. The Baron's face was stone. Tucker's was slack-broken. The journal passed from Calder's hand to a deputy's satchel, sealed, guarded on its way to men who would either burn it or finally let it speak. Nora stepped away from Cole just far enough to look north across the lake. The sun cleared the ridge, now gold and merciless, painting the water in fire. She lifted her left hand, slow trembling, and pressed it to the wound on her shoulder. The scar would be ugly, jagged, permanent, a mark no apron could hide. May Whitaker approached, hesitant, eyes shining. She stopped a few feet away. You saved us, May said again, soft-broken. All of us. Nora looked at her. Really looked. Saw the woman who'd swept glass from her store floor, who trusted a stranger's quiet strength. I didn't save anyone, Nora said quietly. I just stopped running. May reached out, touched Nora's arm, light, brief, then stepped back. Nora turned toward the lake again, and the Rio Grande's anchor chain rattled as she waited. Sailors called orders. The launch pulled away carrying two men who would face justice or vanish into the machinery of power. The wind rose low, steady, lifting dust from the shore in thin golden veils. Nora stood alone at the water's edge, hands still pressed to her shoulder. The scar throbbed under her palm, warm, alive, a promise of nights she would wake sweating, reaching for a gun that wasn't there. From the north trail came the faint, distant sound of a single horse. Hooves on rock moving slow, deliberate. She didn't turn, but her fingers curled tighter against the wound. And May Whitaker, watching from the ridge, whispered to Doc Ezra Hale, "She's not done. And maybe she never will be." The dust swirled higher, golden in the rising sun. The lake lay quiet, and Nora Kane, whatever was left of her, stood there bleeding, breathing, waiting for the next shadow to move. The first edge of dawn broke cold and pale over Laguna Grande, turning the water from black to dull steel. Smoke from the steam launch still hung low, a gray smear against the sky. But the engine had gone silent, choked off by the heavier silhouette of the USS Rio Grande anchored offshore. Her guns trained on the smaller vessel. Captain Elias Holt's launch cut through the ripples now, carrying armed sailors in crisp blue, their oars dipping in unison. Nora Kane knelt on the rocky shore where she'd fallen, journal clutched against her chest. Blood had soaked through her blouse in a dark, spreading bloom. The fresh wound on her shoulder throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Each pulse a reminder of the price already paid. The Colt lay beside her in the dust, empty now, 5 shots gone, the last one still ringing in her ears. Jack Calder rode in at the head of his men coat, flapping in the morning wind. He reined up hard, swung down boots, crunching gravel as he crossed to her. His face, lined, weathered, went still when he saw the blood, the journal, the way she held herself together with nothing but will. "Nora," he said quietly. No title, no legend, just her name. She looked up. Her eyes were dry, but the skin around them was tight, bruised-looking. Calder knelt beside her. One of his deputies moved to cuff Baron Klaus Voss, who stood rigid, greatcoat, muddied monocle, cracked face, pale with the fury of a man who'd believed himself untouchable. Major Boone Tucker was already on his knees, wrists bound, staring at the ground like it might swallow him. Calder reached for the journal. Nora let him take its slow, reluctant fingers, opening. He flipped it open. Pages rustled, names, dates, transfers, and codes. Orders signed in Secretary Elias Crow's own hand. One entry, dated the night Nate died, carried a single line in Tucker's careful script, Kane silenced per directive. No witnesses. Calder's jaw tightened. He closed the book gently, as though it might break. "This ends it," he said. Crow. The payments. The whole rotten line. Nate will be cleared public record, full honors. Nora nodded once. The motion cost her. Pain flared bright in her shoulder, but she didn't flinch. From the ridge above, May Whitaker watched. She'd ridden out with Doc Ezra Hale as soon as word reached Red Bluff Crossing. May stood a little apart, eyes red-rimmed shawl clutched tight against the dawn chill. Doc Ezra beside her, glasses, fogged hands clasped like prayer. May's lips moved, barely audible. "She saved us," she whispered. "But she'll never be at peace again." Nora heard it, didn't look up. Calder offered his hand. Come back, Nora. The service needs you. We can finish this clean Washington trial's the works. She looked at his hand, calloused, steady, then at Cole, who'd ridden in behind Calder, arm in a sling now, face drawn, but eyes fixed on her. He hadn't spoken since they'd found her kneeling, just watched waiting. Nora shook her head. Slow, final. I'm done, she said, voice cracked from smoke and pain. I'm going home with him. Calder studied her a long moment. Then he nodded once, understanding more than he said. She rose, unsteady shoulders screaming, and walked to Cole. He met her halfway, wrapped his good arm around her without a word. She leaned into him, forehead against his chest, breathing in the familiar smell of him sweat leather home. His heartbeat was steady under her ear, faster than usual, but steady. She turned her face up to his. We can go back to the ranch, she whispered, voice raw. But I'll never sleep easy again. Cole didn't answer with words. He only tightened his hold, eyes, wet, silent. The Rio Grande's launch reached the shore. Sailors moved in efficient quiet, taking Voss and Tucker aboard. The Baron's face was stone. Tucker's was slack-broken. The journal passed from Calder's hand to a deputy's satchel, sealed, guarded on its way to men who would either burn it or finally let it speak. Nora stepped away from Cole just far enough to look north across the lake. The sun cleared the ridge, now gold and merciless, painting the water in fire. She lifted her left hand, slow trembling, and pressed it to the wound on her shoulder. The scar would be ugly, jagged, permanent, a mark no apron could hide. May Whitaker approached, hesitant, eyes shining. She stopped a few feet away. You saved us, May said again, soft, broken. All of us. Nora looked at her, really looked, saw the woman who'd swept glass from her store floor, who trusted a stranger's quiet strength. I didn't save anyone, Nora said quietly. I just stopped running. May reached out, touched Nora's arm, light, brief, then stepped back. Nora turned toward the lake again, and the Rio Grande's anchor chain rattled as she waited. Sailors called orders. The launch pulled away, carrying two men who would face justice or vanish into the machinery of power. The wind rose low, steady, lifting dust from the shore in thin golden veils. Nora stood alone at the water's edge, hands still pressed to her shoulder. The scar throbbed under her palm, warm, alive, a promise of nights she would wake sweating, reaching for a gun that wasn't there. From the north trail came the faint, distant sound of a single horse hooves on rock, moving slow, deliberate. She didn't turn, but her fingers curled tighter against the wound. And May Whitaker, watching from the ridge, whispered to Doc Ezra Hale, she's not done. And maybe she never will be. The dust swirled higher, golden in the rising sun. The lake lay quiet. Nora and Cole turned their horses south, toward the ranch, toward the life they'd tried to keep. But the wind kept blowing red dust, rising in thin veils, and somewhere in the distance, the echo of hooves never quite faded. Nora felt it in her bones, iron. Nora was still there, quiet, patient, waiting in the shadows of every quiet morning yet to come. And she knew without saying it aloud that the mask was gone for good. There was no going back to the woman who'd once believed silence could outlast the past. Only forward, scarred, weary, and no longer alone with the weight of what she'd carried, finally shared, but never lifted. The trail stretched south under the climbing sun. They rode on two figures, small against the vast, red plain. Behind them, the lake shimmered, and the wind carried the faint, far-off sound of one last rider fading into the breaks, whether friend or memory, no one could say. Nora pressed her hand harder against the wound. She didn't look back. but she felt the shadow move just once across her heart, and the day stretched on bright, merciless, unfinished. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.